Did you know that Mew isn't as benevolent as you thought, and that there is also a card that says it might be evil?
Say my name, Eisenberg. You're goddamn right.
Professor Ivy. This is by far one of the greatest mysteries in the Pokémon anime. Professor Ivy was first introduced in the episode Pokéball Peril, a young woman who was the first known person to be in possession of the infamous GS Ball. Having fallen in love with her, Brock decided to stay at her lab for the rest of the Orange Islands arc, until the episode A Tense Situation, where he surprises Ash and company in Pallet Town. When Ash questions Brock about Professor Ivy, he adopts a fetal position, asking Ash not to mention her name. Curious about what's wrong, he asks Delia what happened, and here's what's interesting. One day she and Mr. Mime were walking back from grocery shopping and found Brock on the ground wearing a trench coat and a hat. He was in bad condition, as if beaten up, and this always made me wonder if Brock somehow pulled a rushy move with Professor Ivy, and in turn she hurt Brock both physically and emotionally. However, I think there are two theories that are the most plausible. Professor Ivy already had a partner. It states that Brock was confident that he would become Professor Ivy's partner, until one of those days Professor Ivy introduced her boyfriend to Brock, breaking his heart. Brock would have hidden his feelings and made an excuse to leave the lab. This theory makes a lot of sense, as Professor Oak tells Brock that Professor Ivy sent her best regards to him, meaning that at least on Professor Ivy's side there were no hard feelings. The second one states that, as almost every single female character Brock has shown interest in, Professor Ivy simply rejected him. Although I don't know why Brock was found on the ground in bad condition, it makes sense if we think that he was so depressed that he was walking to exhaustion. But that doesn't explain why he was wearing a trench coat and a hat. Now that I think about the trench coat, I wonder if Brock had the brilliant idea of using HM5. Giant Dragonite. One of my favorite episodes in Pokémon is Mystery at the Lighthouse. It's the first time in which the concept of giant Pokémon was introduced. While we've seen Pokémon that are of a different size among species such as Gary's Krabby in comparison to Ash's, the giant Dragonite is completely different, as its size can only compare to that of a Dynamax Pokémon. We've seen a Dragonite like this when Lance is battling against Diantha. I actually wonder if the Dynamax and Gigantamax mechanics were inspired by this gigantic Pokémon that was never seen again. This reminds me of the episode Enlighten Up, in which Misty is meditating but is distracted by the thought of a water legendary Pokémon that has an extremely similar fin to that of Mega Gyarados. Mewtwo at Bill's Lighthouse. Talking about the same episode, we can see a huge door that leads to the inside of Bill's lighthouse. There are several Pokémon engraved on the door, some of them legendary such as Moltres and Zapdos, but as the entry states, there's a depiction of Mewtwo. It would have made sense if the Pokémon in question had been Mew, as it's an ancient Pokémon. But Mewtwo, as most people know, is an artificial Pokémon that probably didn't exist by the time the lighthouse was built. This is obviously a mistake, but at some point it made me think that Mewtwo could have also been an ancient Pokémon, or that the one we know from the movie was cloned from an original Mewtwo that existed in the past rather than Mew. Mystery Trainers. At the very beginning of the first episode of the anime, we can see a battle happening on TV between a trainer that is widely believed to be Bruno and somebody else. Who is that other trainer that Bruno is losing against? Well, considering that it seems to be a more powerful trainer, and that also possesses a Gengar, it is believed that the trainer in question is none other than Agatha. This old rival of Professor Oak has only had a single appearance in the anime, being that in the episode The Scheme Team, in which she defeats Ash Ketchum with her Gengar, probably the same one that used against Bruno at the beginning of the anime. Arcanine as a legendary Pokémon. Arcanine's category is legendary Pokémon, but not legendary in the way Lugia or Articuno are, as this Pokémon is considered this way in Chinese mythology, which by the way it's something that doesn't make a lot of sense in the Pokémon world, but I guess it was the beginning of the franchise, so they were still figuring things out. This was evident in the second episode of the Indigo League, in which Ash sees an engraving of the legendary birds, but also of Arcanine, as if it belonged with the true legendary Pokémon. If you read recent Pokémon Pokédex entries about this Pokémon, you can notice how Game Freak has been trying to step away from the references of Arcanine being a legendary Pokémon and also mentioning China. Ho-Oh. The first episode featured a very special Pokémon in the form of Ho-Oh. It was the first sign ever that the Pokémon franchise would include more than 151 Pokémon, and to this day, a total of 1025 Pokémon among other variants exist in the Pokémon universe. Differently colored Pokémon. Not to be confused with shiny Pokémon, these differently colored Pokémon refer to all those that aren't shiny, but have a different color from their normal counterparts. The list for the Indigo League and Orange Islands goes as follows: a green Pidgey, a pink Butterfree, a green Weedle, Pokémon from Valencia Island, the Crystal Onyx, pink Pokémon, and a light blue Lapras. GS Ball. The GS Ball was a Pokeball in possession of Professor Ivy in the Orange Islands. Nothing is known about how she got her hands on this gold and silver Pokeball, and in spite of several attempts to find out what its content was, nobody could get to open it. Masamitsu Hidaka, a director and storyboard artist for the Pokémon anime, explained that the GS Ball was originally going to contain a Celebi that would join Ash and company. However, it was decided that Celebi would be the star of the fourth movie, so the story arc was viewed as redundant, and the ball was left with Kurt in hopes that viewers would eventually forget about it. A similar concept would later be recycled with Meloetta during Pokémon the series Black and White. Slowpoke's evolution. Slowpoke is part of a very interesting phenomenon in the Pokémon world. While in the games a Slowpoke can simply evolve at level 37, in the anime it is known for needing a Shelder to bite its tail in order to achieve its final form. The question is, what happens to Shelder? Can the spiral Pokémon it becomes exist independently? The answer could have been a yes, but it never happened. If we look at the Space World 97 demo of Pokémon Gold, there's a Pokémon called Taban that is precisely the detached form of the spiral Shelder that evolved by biting Slowpoke's tail. In the Pokémon Yellow Pokédex, it states that if Shelder detaches from Slowbro's tail, it will devolve into a Slowpoke again, but maybe Shelder won't, as it was considered to exist as its own Pokémon in the aforementioned game. In this case, Taban is the only, or at least one of the few Pokémon that didn't make the final cut as its own Pokémon, but that we have seen throughout the generations attached to Slowbro's tail. Ash's original starter. It's possible that the vast majority of you know this, but Pikachu was never in Ash's mind when choosing his first Pokémon. Indeed, he got Pikachu because he overslept and the other 3 trainers of Pallet Town had already chosen their starter. If Ash had made it on time, his first choice would have been Squirtle. In case he hadn't got it, his second option would have been Bulbasaur, and the last Charmander. This is acknowledged in a Pokémon trainer's choice by Ash, who asks which Pokémon was his original choice as a starter. The other 2 Pallet Town trainers. Despite being a quiet and remote small town, Pallet Town has seen the rise of 2 extremely powerful Pokémon trainers, Gary Oak and Ash Ketchum. But what happened to the other 2 trainers? Is there any instance throughout the anime that states what happened to those 2 who chose Charmander and Bulbasaur as their Pokémon? I found out that the answer is provided in Showdown at the Pokécorral. When Ash and Gary visit Professor Oak, he congratulates the 2 as the other 2 trainers that left Pallet Town flunked out, as they couldn't complete their gym challenge. I wish they had made the decision of developing at least one of the 2 characters into some sort of final or secret boss at some point in the future, rather than making them not skilled enough to handle Pokémon in battle. Pokémon Tower. The Pokémon Tower is one of the main landmarks in the Kanto region, and it is known for housing hundreds of graves for Pokémon. However, its anime counterpart is completely different. More than a tower, at least from the inside, it resembles an old mansion where people used to live, but same as the old chateau, it was abandoned and taken over by ghost Pokémon. Nothing else is mentioned about the history of this place, but we can say it has quite an interesting architecture. Primeape's Destiny. Why don't you let me train it for a while? Those were the words spoken by Anthony, a character that kept Ash's Primeape in episode 29. As many of you know, Primeape never returned to Ash's hands nor was seen again, with the exception of flashbacks in future episodes. What happened to this Pokemon? Even Butterfree, a Pokemon that Ash said goodbye to in the first season, reunited with him more than 2 decades after in Pokemon Journeys. Having Ash finish his journey in the Pokemon anime, it's very unlikely that we'll get to see his Primeape again. The Sevi Islands and the Orange Islands are very close. When I played Pokemon Fire Red and I visited the Sevi Islands, I thought it was an homage to the Orange Islands, or that they were the Orange Islands of the core series games, but they're actually separate entities. According to an anime map released with the Rise of Darkrai, the Sevi Islands are in relatively the same area as the Orange Islands. I couldn't find that very map, but I did find a map that indicates that the Orange Islands are south of Cinnabar Island. And since the Sevi Islands are part of Kanto, it makes sense all the islands are close to each other. Unnamed Pokemon Sculpture. In the ancient puzzle of Pokemopolis, we can see several artifacts belonging to an ancient civilization. Among the objects, there's a Psyduck with strange marks, such as those seen in the giant Alakazam, Gengar and Jigglypuff. Nonetheless, we can see Brock holding a sculpture of what resembles an unknown bird Pokemon. No more information is known about it. Ash didn't die in the movie. There's a popular belief that Ash died during the events of the first movie, but that was revived by the tears of the Pokemon on New Island. However, this was never the case, as according to Takeshi Shudo, Ash was petrified but not killed when Mewtwo and Mew's Psychic Blast collided with him. The 15 Kanto Gyms. This theory arises from the episode The Battle of the Badge, in which Gary shows Ash that he is in possession of 10 gym badges, but if we pay close attention, only 3 badges correspond to known Kanto gyms, being the Boulder, Cascade and Rainbow badges. The other 7 belong to yet to see gyms, if ever, unless at least one of them belongs to the Yas or Cas gyms in Dark City. If we add all gym badges earned by Gary and Ash, that gives us a total of 15 badges that coincidentally could match all 15 types that existed back in Generation 1. Animals in the Pokemon world. There was a time when Game Freak and the people behind Pokemon in general didn't know what to do with the franchise in certain areas, and this shows in the fact that in early episodes, real animals were shown sharing the world with Pokemon. One of the earliest examples happens in the first episode of the anime, in which a wild Pidgey can be seen eating a worm right before Ash tries to catch it. Another example are fish that can be seen through the window of the sunken SSN, or the Ghastly that turns into a mongoose, a predator of snakes and cobras. Actually, Takeshi Shudo, the chief writer for the original series of the Pokemon anime, stated that animals went extinct in the Pokemon world years ago, and that the presence of them in early episodes of the anime was due to the animation staff not paying enough attention. No Pokemon entry found. There have been several instances in which some creatures haven't been able to be identified by the Pokédex, one of them being Mewtwo for obvious reasons. However, in the episode The Ghost of Maiden's Peak, Ghastly summons a group of ghostly creatures that resemble skulls. Ash uses his Pokédex to try to identify the creatures, but the Pokédex concludes that they aren't Pokémon, terrifying both Ash and Misty. Pikablu. The myth, the legend. Who doesn't remember Pikablu back in Generation 1? One of the most mysterious Pokegods. But where did it come from? If you've seen my Pokemon Red, Blue and Yellow Iceberg, you might know the answer. Everything started with a set of Pokemon cards manufactured by Topps about the first Pokemon movie. One of them reads the following: as soon as Togepi is asleep, trouble approaches. Trumping down the road and laughing loudly as if they own the place, comes Buru, Raichu, Cubone and Pikablu. Now, we know who Raichu and Cubone are, and Buru is the Japanese name of Snubbull, but Pikablu? Pikablu refers to Meryl, but this is not its Japanese name, as it's Mariru, basically the same in English. What were they thinking by taking the liberty to change the name of a Pokemon like that? This is where it all started, and many theories about how to get this Pokemon in the first generation spread, but of course it all was a lie, and the mythical Pikablu was just Meryl, a quite common Pokemon in future generations. Blaine's appearance. Have you noticed how the gym leader of Cinnabar Island doesn't look anything like his game's counterpart? Well, he actually does, at least in early Sugimori artwork for Pokemon Red and Green, in which we can see a bald man with hair on the back and sides of his head without mustache or sunglasses. The reason behind this change is unknown, but I guess it was to tie him to the Cinnabar lab and the experiments that were involved in the creation of Mewtwo alongside Mr. Fuji. Crystal Onyx and the Terrestrial Phenomenon. This unique Pokemon has been one of the most interesting creatures ever seen in the anime, and many Pokemon fans have been waiting for its appearance in Pokemon games. However, this never happened, at least not officially, but if we talk about ROM hacks such as Pokemon Naranja, we would have the chance to find it and catch it. This Pokemon is unaffected by water attacks in the anime and weak against fire moves. In Pokemon Naranja, this Onix is a Steel Ice type, and many have speculated that due to its crystalline aspect, and the fact that it's clearly a different type from its regular form, this Pokemon inspired the Terrestrial Phenomenon in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. Dr. Fuji. Dr. Fuji from the anime is the counterpart of the person who we know in the core series games as Mr. Fuji, the old man who hands Red the Pokeflute in Lavender Town, as both characters are known for being scientists who were involved in the expedition that led to Mew's discovery and Mewtwo's creation. On my side of the world, we never got the opportunity to watch the uncut story of Mewtwo's origin, so maybe some of you don't know about this, but Dr. Fuji from the anime has a tragic background. He dedicated most of his life to research cloning due to his daughter Amber passing away. This reached Giovanni's ears, who decided to fund Fuji's experiments with the condition that he cloned the mythical Pokemon Mew. Fuji was able to preserve Amber's soul, and his attempts to clone her deceased daughter seem to have come to fruition, but sadly neither her nor the starter Pokemon survived the process, as the only survivor was the legendary Pokemon Mewtwo. As I've mentioned in the icebergs in which I've spoken about it, this is one of the saddest stories in the Pokemon universe. Venustoys. Venustoys was one of these Pokegods that were mentioned as playground rumors, and it was a fusion between Venusaur and Blastoise. However, it didn't originate in the wild minds of children, but in the anime. In The Ghost of Maiden's Peak, there's a Ghastly that summons a Venusaur and a Blastoise, and on top of that, he fuses them, creating Venustoys. In the same manner as the giant Dragonite, the legendary water Pokemon seen in Misty's mind, and the Crystal Onyx could have inspired the Dynamax Mega Evolution and Terrestrial Phenomenon respectively, I wonder if Venustoys could inspire a fusion mechanics in a future Pokemon game. Puka. Puka is an old Pikachu that came from the sea on a plank 20 years prior to the events of the first season of the anime, and was found by a surfing enthusiast named Victor. What's special about this blue-eyed Pikachu, besides the mystery of where exactly it came from, is that it has a special ability to sense big waves, an extrasensory power if you like. If this surfing Pikachu with extrasensory power rings a bell, it's because Alolan Raichu, an electric psychic Raichu that surfs on its tail, drew inspiration from Puka. As I mentioned before, the real mystery about this Pokemon lies in its origin. Could it be that this Pikachu arrived from the Alola region all the way to the Seafoam Islands? Missing Fearow Trainer. Due to a storm being caused by Mewtwo, the ferry that would take the trainers to New Island is cancelled, but despite this, some trainers departed to their destination. Out of all of them, there's one that is seen riding her Fearow. What's interesting about her is that she's actually never seen again in the movie, implying that in spite of her efforts, she could never make it to New Island. It's unknown whether this trainer survived or not, but there's no information on the matter. Early Mewtwo Strikes Back trailer. I remember trying to download the first Pokemon movie from Ares, but instead I got a different video in which I saw images from the first movie that actually never happened. I didn't know what I was looking at, so I saved the file for years in my hard drive, and after many years I got curious. It was when I discovered that the video in question was an early trailer for the movie showing several scenes that never appeared in it, but the most intriguing ones were those in which Miranda, the harbor manager in the movie, and somebody who most probably is Misty showed up. Some people speculated that the movie depicted Misty being a mother, and that such girl was Ash's daughter in the future. However, there's no information about who these characters are, or how relevant those scenes were for the movie in general. Oswald's alien detector was right all this time. There are several episodes in the anime that mention that Pokemon such as Clefairy came from outer space, and it is beyond any doubt that these Pokemon have been able to develop technology that allows them to do so. In the episode Clefairy Tales, there's a space enthusiast named Oswald that has a device that is supposedly able to detect aliens. The device starts making a sound in the presence of Clefairy and Jigglypuff, two Pokemon that are known to have come from outer space. While Jigglypuff is not mentioned to have come from beyond Earth, Wild Jigglypuff were featured during the Enigma Week event in Pokemon Go, alongside other Pokemon known or rumored to have alien origins. But what about when it detects that Misty is also an alien? Well, it wasn't referring to Misty, but to her Togepi that, as many of you know, is a pure fairy type. The question is, has Togepi or any present fairy Pokemon been implied to come from outer space? The answer could be yes, if rumors are true. Let me elaborate. If you watch my Pokemon X and Y Iceberg, you might remember I talked about the XY files. That entry refers to a scrap plot for Pokemon X and Y leaked by somebody by the name of XY Cider, a person that claimed to have been in touch with people who worked on Pokemon X and Y, and that stated that X and Y's original plot would have had AZ as an alien, with the mission of destroying Earth, but upon meeting a Floette, it had a change of heart. But what connects everything is that fairy Pokemon would have an alien origin, being Pokemon from the moon who came to Earth even further in the past and had learned to live with humans in peace. Do you see the connection? Oswald was capable of detecting with 100% accuracy that the Pokemon around him actually came from outer space. I'm not sure if back then the fairy type was already in Game Freak's plans, but this is definitely one of the most fascinating theories. Little God or Evil. Remember Lawrence III, that Pokemon collector that dreamt about catching Lugia in the second movie? Well, his desire to go that length started with a Mew card, the ancient Mew card to be more specific. In the real world, it was given out with the purchase of a ticket for the theatrical run of The Power of One in the US and other countries worldwide, at participating cinemas within the first week of release. This is a very unique card as it's written in runic alphabet. The content of the card reads the following: enthronement, right of succession, birth, death. Besides the typical information found in Pokemon cards, there's a text that says Little God or Evil. Does it mean that it's questioning the divine nature of the mythical Pokemon? Well, in a 2019 reprint, the text was corrected to Little Good or Evil. While it doesn't imply that Mew is a god, it does question the nature of Mew. But why? You might be surprised, but Mew hasn't always been this cute, benevolent Pokemon. In fact, its personality was very different in the Japanese version of the first movie, as it wanted to defend original uncloned Pokemon, believing them to be just as good, if not better than the clones. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more content like this. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next one.